Jambo, Salam alaikum, Namaste, Ni hao. For the last 6.5 years, Annika, I was the Dean and Director General of the Thunderbird School of Global Management, and I just recently stepped down. I'm a sort of a 6 to 8 year guy, at least on the professional side. Keep it on so that my wife doesn't get angry with me. Uh, and uh, um, and it's a time of reflection. As Anand said, and I think most people know, I'm a person of action. I'm not a typical academic in that sense. And even at what we did at Thunderbird was quite transformative, not just in terms of the degrees and the programs that we created, educational programs, but the engagement we had with stakeholders across the public, private, nonprofit sector. But if I could, say a little bit about what we've been focusing on now, it's really three or fourfold. We continue to do work to bring together this three-part framework for climate transformation and what I would call climate positive sustainable development. As we know, and you know, and Anna knows, and our audience and participants, members know, we have been stuck still for 30 years on the climate side between the global north and the global south. And that hasn't changed. And when we think about peak oil and fossil fuels, we're far from peak oil. And that's because the global south and emerging markets still are hungry for development, and rightfully so. At the same time, the planet is in peril. So we have to reconcile these two. And so we have to really be thinking about climate positive sustainable development. How can we create um, transformative solutions that uh, supersede this great divide that continues to bedevil us? And so for me, that means three parts. We have to have three pillars of climate positive sustainable development. The first is adaptation and resilience, and we have invested far too little in adaptation and resilience. And as extreme weather events and all the challenges continue to mount, we know that that's got to be more focused on. The second is certainly deep and transformative reductions in GHG gases. But the third is very much removal. Uh, the removal of carbon dioxide and methane from the atmosphere, where we know for CO2, 97, 98% of CO2 is legacy carbon already in the atmosphere. And if you think about it this way, and so one of the things I'm doing is over the last 5 or 6 years, I wrote a white paper for the World Economic Forum on carbon removal as a multi-trillion-dollar industry, not only as an absolutely essential pillar for a climate positive sustainable development that can create jobs, empower livelihoods around the world, and really transform even the very way we think about climate. And so that's been really important. Um, and I just to make it very, very easy and accessible, because I always think about my parents, my mother now, and my children. How do you explain carbon removal? And I think I'm using this as an example also what I've tried to do in my life, from the scholarship side and academic side to the very world of practice, making really, complex concepts accessible. Is what we've done is, carbon in the atmosphere is just pollution. It's like trash in our streets, in our rivers, and we see that trash, right? And so we want, if we're, good citizens, and I believe that 99% of the world are good citizens, we want to remove, recycle, reduce that trash. And so it's just carbon is trash that we don't see, but it's all around us. And so, not surprisingly, of course, we want to reduce more of it. That's going to reduce it so less of it goes into the atmosphere. But we also want to remove it and recycle it. We want to remove it. And luckily, there are lots of opportunities, natural solutions, like afforestation, and there's been a big focus on trees. I want to say the big challenge is we focus too much on planting trees rather than growing trees and making sure they continue to grow. And so, everybody wants to say how many trees they planted, but are they actually going to grow to maturity and do the work that we want them to do, not just in terms of the climate and environment, but in terms of livelihoods, right? So we have natural solutions, biochar, all sorts of other amazing things. We had a wonderful panel on the oceans and how important the oceans are for carbon removal. But we also then have technological solutions. and engineered solutions, direct air capture and other types of things. And if you put all that together, we also have the opportunity to take that carbon and rather for it just to be an externality, something we put out into the atmosphere, this pollution that we don't see, to recycle it and create negative carbon products, negative carbon building materials, negative carbon plastics, that, all sorts of things. And that creates more jobs and a transition to a green economy. So this three-part framework of adaptation, reduction, removal still isn't accepted and embraced and invested in as widely and as powerfully as it needs to be. And so a lot of the work is around that and making sure that it's climate positive, sustainable development, not just climate on the one hand and sustainable development on the other hand. So that's a big part of what I'm working on. A second is, of course, then thinking about the various tools and ways we can get there. Of course, the rage is AI. And you both know, Annika, Anand, that I'm a big proponent, of technologies and disruptive technologies and the fourth industrial revolution and fifth wave of innovation. And so we're doing a very big project on the potential for AI to advance climate action and sustainability. Again, in the private sector, the public sector, nonprofit sector, new startups that are being created. Go back to adaptation. We have a fantastic startup called Alpha Geo that has 60 billion data points, and using AI can help to direct us to where adaptation is needed most, where insurers and real estate challenges are, insurers have to engage more effectively, where public sector officials thinking about smart cities have to do that. So investing in the new entrepreneurs and technologies of the future, obviously the new educational programs of the future. We did tremendous new programs at Thunderbird over the last 6.5, 7 years. One of them was the first master's in space leadership, business, and policy. Some people might say, oh, well, what are we doing about space when we have problems on Earth? We know that if we do space in a responsible and creative and entrepreneurial way and collaborative way, it will solve problems on Earth. And so that was very much, the frame of the program. And then the carbon removal partnership, and then a lot of focus on how, and that's been a red thread of my life, bringing together different stakeholders, global North, global South, across sectors, across cultures, to really come up with innovative solutions. In the end, it is about innovation, but scaling innovation. And so, I launched a company a long time ago called Innovations for Scaling Impact. It was a private sector sort of social enterprise early, and I still believe in that frame. We have to have innovations, but innovations that scale impact. And that doesn't mean just replication and growth. That means creating networks, creating movements, creating partnerships, creating momentum that really can be transformative. So lots of fun stuff going on, supposedly in semi-retirement, but that's how it works for folks like us.
You sound retired. You sound like you're on the golf course a lot. I have a follow-up question. Actually, I have two. You mentioned the generational gap, as I would call it, where it used to mean legacy equals money. And now legacy for the younger generation means a clean planet that we leave behind, right? In my generation, that's what it means for our kids, for the future generation. How do we really bridge that? Because I feel like there's a complete disruption in understanding for an older generation and a younger generation.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a father of two incredible young men and a beautiful young daughter, and it's all about legacy for certainly my wife and I, and what we're trying to do for our kids, but for all children. This Brundtland Commission, for those again, I always try to connect the world of ideas to the world of practice. That sustainable development is our future generations not only as well off as we are, but even better off than we are, is really the core principle for us as parents and as professionals. So, I'll be biased. I know Anand was kind enough to have my son, my older son, Ram, join the Next Youth panel, and he's doing an incredible thing in creating a new production company on transnational youth content for young people around the world around issues like climate and migration and so forth. And, I couldn't be prouder that he's doing that. Raul and Zara are doing their own types of things. Raul's focusing on corporate finance and environment, and Zara's already got her own, sustainable dog biscuit company. She's 10. So this all feels very good at home. But more generally, that's why education has been so important to me. Again, you and Anna know I, come from a family that was very wealthy, fourth generation East African, Ugandan, and Kenyan, Indian. We were the 20th wealthiest family in the country, and we were expelled by a dictator named Idi Amin. Most young people won't even remember that name or know of that name, but we lost everything, ended up in refugee camps for a number of years where we had little education, let alone food or water and other basic necessities. So we were lucky enough to be sponsored in the United States. And I've been blessed, and education transformed my life. I'm now back at Stanford University where I did all my degrees. And I was there during the big booms of the internet revolution, the third industrial revolution, now back again for the fourth and fifth, hopefully. And so education is a big part of it. And one of the things we did, again, back at Thunderbird was this 100 Million Learners Initiative. And the idea was, again, innovations for scaling impact. That, we have 3 billion people without access to education, training in the world, more than, close to half, really. That's a minimum 3 billion. We can't build schools, physical infrastructure, high schools and elementary schools and universities fast enough to get to these people. And yet we have this incredible digital transformation that's going around us. And so we envision a thought that, and we need more entrepreneurs of all kinds, for-profit, social entrepreneurs, nonprofit entrepreneurs, public entrepreneurs, and that entrepreneurship and innovation was really critical. So we created a program to reach 100 million learners around the world at no cost, whether they're in the global majority with no education, or if they're trying to get a graduate degree and they just don't have access to or graduate credentials, and they don't have the resources to do so. And then not only do it so that it's no cost, but the three main kind of barriers. One was can't build the infrastructure fast enough, and the faculty and the teachers and so forth. The second is, of course, the cost, but the third was language. And for someone like myself, like so many of us around the world who speak multiple languages and have lived all around the world, I've been to 124 countries in the last 7 years. We wanted to make sure that anyone, regardless of language, could access that. And then this goes back to harnessing digital and AI and so forth. We invented with Google, and we're very grateful to them as partners and many others in the ecosystem, the first ever academic translation factory, so that we could translate content to 133 languages for academic purposes, which is different, for educational purposes than just conversational. This is not just, Google Translate or, Siri or Alexa or whatever. This is real, but it wasn't just, Annika, the Romance languages. It was Arabic and Hindi and Swahili and so forth and so on. So again, education is a tremendously important part of what we have to do in terms of climate positive sustainable development, and making sure that those future generations who do care about legacy in this way are empowered with all of the skill sets, all of the capabilities, all the knowledge in a world of lifelong learning, because it's all happening so fast. They can get it instantaneously, they can get it all the time, but how can they build that over time from what we say, K or even pre-K to gray, like myself.
Sanjeev, now let's switch to some more interesting and more challenging subjects. I'm going to bring to you um, one of the key learnings that we have from our conference and from our online panels, as you've seen, is that we tend to segregate climate issues. And so when we talk about oceans, we tend to forget about biodiversity. When we talk about carbon, we tend to again forget about the oceans. But at the pillar, as one of the key pillars here, is biodiversity, and it is probably the least important climate pillar. But if you look at the reality of it, whether it's the phytoplanktons or the trees that you talk about, or the species loss that we're seeing, what are your thoughts on a unified message so that we don't have the segregated discussion of saying we don't believe all climate is change is wrong because we don't necessarily believe the figures in one area.
Yeah, no, it's a great framing and challenge. I will, again, since this is partly about the future, but also about how we got here and me personally, I started my work on large dams around the world. And, for 30 or 40 years post World War II, the large dams were synonymous with development. Uh, you know, 7 of the first loans of the World Bank were for large dams around the world, for hydropower, for irrigation, for water supply, and so forth. In our home country of India, large dams were the temples, right, of modern India, according to Nehru. But this was all over the world. And when I started working on large dams in the 1980s and 90s, back here at Stanford, where I'm back again, we had built 40,000, 45,000 large dams around the world. China alone had built 20,000 large dams between the 1970s and 90s. But we had become more clear, and the evidence had started to really mount about the social and environmental impacts. And I bring this up because of the question you raised about uh, two parts of it: biodiversity, particularly, but also integration across multiple criteria, issues, factors, dimensions coming together, right? And at that time, it was, well, of course you need large dams because economically, if you want to grow, you need irrigation, you need electricity, you need to be able to build industries and agriculture and so forth. And, we can handle the social environmental costs. Indigenous peoples being displaced, flora and fauna being lost downstream, upstream, whether that's fisheries, whether that's, you know, um, biodiversity loss of all kinds, right? And we launched the World Commission on Dams back in 1998 to bring together all of these stakeholders, one of these early multi-stakeholder global initiatives, and say, we want to look at all these dimensions simultaneously and interactively in a systemic way. We want to bring together stakeholders, again, from the public sector, the private sector, NGOs, global north and south, to make sure all the different perspectives, including those of First Peoples around the world, are heard. And we want to not only study it, but we want to create actionable guidelines so that we can do things better. Now, that was almost 25 years ago, a little over than 25 years ago. President Mandela inaugurated the report, which I wrote at the time. And I guess why I bring this up on is that this issue that you raise has been bedeviling us for decades, and we still seem to kind of cycle around it. And I feel like we know how to do this. Exactly what I just said. We know we need to bring multiple stakeholders together to make sure that different perspectives are at the table, and to do so in a participatory way, in an empowered way, and so forth. We know that we have to harness the best data and evidence, and we can do that now even more effectively in terms of the technology we have. Back in 2003, Eric Schmidt of Google said, we have as much data every day as the previous thousands of years. Now it's every minute, right? But we have to be able to harness that. So evidence and data and knowledge and so forth. But the third is really, how do we create these partnerships so that we don't say the oceans over here and biodiversity over here. We don't say carbon removal over here and say adaptation over here, but these things come together. And then finally, I'd want to come back to education, the response I gave to Annika. The more we are empowering our young people to have those types of systemic perspectives, to be able to absorb different types of data, to connect with different types of people, to be able to be respectful of different lived experiences, the more we're going to get those really systemic, holistic solutions, so that we don't, but let's be fair. I mean, it's really complex, and it's becoming more and more complex every day. And so I will say, AI has a lot of, and our new technologies alone, I don't want to say AI is a, sort of placeholder for multiple technologies. It has a lot of challenges and a lot of risks, including in sustainability, which I hope we get to talk about in a second. But I do believe that augmented intelligence can help us as human beings be even more creative and transformative in solving these great challenges, and also seizing these opportunities. I think this is where I want to leave it. I hope, and this is slightly scans from your question, but it's something I want to set out. I want more and more. I mean, we used to be a problem-solving focused generation, and we want to solve problems. There's no question. There's lots of problems to solve, but it's not very inspiring, to be totally honest. You know, what's inspiring is creating new solutions, is creating new opportunities. And why do I, and we say this because we see that, young people are gravitate towards the entrepreneurs that are creating the new, whatever it might be. I'm not going to name who they are or what they are, but that's what they get expired. So we want to be inspirational. And I think that's about solutions and new opportunities and, the frontier. And by that way, we can solve the problems for sure, because the problems have to be solved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with you. So for instance, we had a panel that talked about feeding phytoplankton as a solution to absorbing more carbon,
Yes.
right? But that is now purely biodiversity, because that's a natural function. We're just enhancing the natural function.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're kind of looking at now is going back to basics, right? Is that where we're finally incorporating the new innovation is happening with nature, not against nature, because we've spent the industrial revolution trying to tame nature. Therefore,
Yes.
the dams, therefore the impact on ecology was considered minimal and completely ignored.
Yes.
You talked about China. We know what just damming the Yellow River has done
Yes.
in creating one of the largest bodies of water, and artificially, and what the devastating impact that's had on the environment in the area. So keeping that in mind, and keeping the fact that new innovation is coming, and it is more planet friendly, it is more um, inclusive of multidisciplinary thought. Whereas, for a while we had climate technology, but then climate technology was considered its own thing. And
Yeah.
if, physics was not included and chemistry was not included, and it was just, you do your own thing in this corner, and we'll do our other thing on this side of it. Um, Education has been the big bridge, right? And when we talk about education, do you think that there is a need for climate education to become part of core curriculum for every child, every college student, for any learner?
Yeah. So I would say sustainability education.
Hmm.
And sustainability has become quite a kind of, and sometimes dirty words,
Yeah.
surprisingly, it's like, is this contradiction? But whatever word we give it, it's not just the climate as you're talking about. It's really about the planet, right? And ecosystems and our stewardship of ecosystems. And I want to say one more thing about biodiversity, forgive me in my early senility here, is that we are part of biodiversity. It's not us and then biodiversity out there. We are part, and we're at risk of extinction.
That's right.
Us as part of the biodiversity is at risk of extinction. The planet will survive. We're going to be gone. So, I think that's an important frame to have. On terms of education, absolutely. Education, as you know, as I've said, devoted all of my life and professionally half of my life to various different types, not just elite, institutions, but working at the grassroots all over the world. And, in every place I've gone, have made sustainability education, sustainable courses, sustainably thinking core to the programs, to the DNA, to everything we do. We even designed our building so that it had the SDG colors. It was that level of detail and focus. So absolutely, without question. But I will say, and this is why I leave the world of education often, because I'm a practical person, and sometimes education doesn't feel like on the front line enough, and I want to create a new enterprise or a new technology or when I was dean of Desmond Tutu Peace Center, being able to work with the Archbishop, God bless his soul, to try to advance peace and reconciliation around the world, not just in South Africa, action oriented. You know, at the same time, educational institutions and all our institutions were designed for the past, not for the future. And that's what frustrates me about even our greatest institutions, educational institutions, is that despite the tremendous, and there is tremendous innovation in terms of, like you said, transdisciplinary, breaking down silos, new frontiers of research, new ways of teaching. It took a pandemic for us to really, 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 in every sector, and certainly education, adopt digital and say we need, this is an opportunity, not a challenge. And yet still there was, the value of that is less than being in person. And my view about that is that they're different experiences. And if we do what we've done for in-person education with digital education, we can create ingenious ways of really, really transforming learning. So the point being is that not only institutions in the world, but all institutions were designed of the past. And so how do we, given we have all of these legacy institutions, the UN, our multinational companies, government agencies all around the world. I think that's going back to Annika, your question about legacy. I think that's the hardest thing, is that when our young people, and we are with them, want to create the future, our institutions still hold us back. And yet we can't get rid of them, right? They're there. The banks, as Anna knows, as you know, Annika, we're launching a new bank in Silicon Valley, of all places in the world, right? Why would you need a bank in Silicon Valley, right? But it's about creating new institutions, and so that's fantastic. But we still have our extant institutions that are, in many ways, iron brakes of progress. And so that's, I think, that's a one that we haven't figured out. And certainly I haven't. I mean, I've been inside big bureaucratic institutions, including, perhaps the biggest and most bureaucratic, the UN. And we need the UN because we have no other place to try to bring the world together. Really, I mean, we have many other smaller places, but in terms of bringing the world together, qua world. And at the same time, we're building these new institutions, new enterprises, new ventures. How do we bring these together so that the innovation and the transformation of the new can help the existing institutions really, really, realize their full potential?
I have another question for you in terms of access and equity. Those are very, very different things. And you mentioned about your program and how it will give, with AI, the chance to everybody to learn online and advance themselves, no matter where they are, no matter what the language is. That's absolutely beautiful. But how do we give equity to the global south? There's such a difference between where we are in the global north and our access. I'm on one of these forums. I have access to you guys. I have access to all these great minds. Anybody can watch these. That gives them access to, but that doesn't equal equity. How do we?
So I want to say something about the program, because I think it was very much not just about access, but about equity. The way the program was designed, and I want to thank our benefactors, Francis and Dion Jaffe, who are really as much not only benefactors, but co-creators of this initiative that continues on, and is that, anywhere in the world, you would get access to the world-class faculty. You're not getting, any old folks, you're getting the world-class. So if you're in the DRC, or if you're in, Korea, you're going to get that same access, the same content, the same skills, the same knowledge, the same faculty, everyone, and at no cost. So that's equitable, right? At no cost, everybody, no matter, regardless, right? So that's remarkable. And really, again, to our benefactors, great kudos for their forward thinking. But I think it starts in today's world of the fourth industrial revolution, fifth wave of innovation, and data revolution, whatever revolution you want to talk about, is digital equity, right? Until we have to accelerate digital equity to the maximum, and I would say even more than any other form right now. And that means infrastructure, that means devices, and that means literacy. Because if every single individual in the world is digitally empowered with those three elements, then they can be empowered to create their future, to learn, and to have not only access, but to have equitable access. So that, in my view, and that's for climate positive sustainable development. So again, Anna, going back to your point about silos, people are talking about digital equity over here. People are talking about climate and biodiversity over here. And my view is you don't get climate positive sustainable development, biodiversity, preservation and conservation without digital excess and equity, Hanukkah. And so if I had $100, I'd put a lot of those dollars, or 100 rupees, or 100 naira, whatever it is. I put a lot of those in digital access, and that would be the infrastructure, the devices, and the literacy, education, empowerment, so that then we're talking about real access and equity.
Yeah, when you talk about access and equity, there's a global format, right? And then sometimes when we look at global formats, we forget the nitty-gritty of the local format, right? I know that one of the tenets of you building Altos Bank in Palo Alto is to provide community banking, right? So when we're talking about global issues, ultimately it comes down to communities.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about your vision for creating a community bank,
Yeah.
because it solves a problem at a different level. While there are these overlying problems and issues, we must ultimately focus on communities.
I really appreciate the question and the way you framed it, Anand, because it's very much that, as we've talked about. It was funny because, certainly myself, and I stand guilty as charged, have been working at the global level and worldwide at this kind of, nosebleed scales. And, we always talked about, think locally and act globally. That was kind of right. That was the frame of our generation. And, we're saying, yes, we need to still think, locally and act globally, but we actually have to think globally and act locally. We have to do the inverse. And so, Altos Bank in Silicon Valley is very much that, which is this crazy market failure gap that emerged in the richest place on the planet, where, as Silicon Valley over the last 30, 40 years became that incredibly, forward-leaning technological disruptor with all the wealth that is created locally and globally, it was underbanked. And, small and medium-sized enterprises, households were not getting the kind of service and access and equity, Annika, that they deserved. And so, great friends from, Stanford undergraduate days and many others, we said, well, we should, as we do all this work around the world, let's now give back, even locally, to a place where most people say, oh, they're fine. But in fact, we had 19 independent banks in Silicon Valley in the 1990s. When we started getting licensed for Altos, what has become Altos Bank 3 years ago, there was only 5 left. And then for Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic banks, very, very sort of big names, particularly Silicon Valley Bank in terms of the entrepreneurship space, collapsed and consolidated. So you only had 3. And so you had this huge gap, and people who wanted to have a banker that they could talk to. Yes, in this digital world, even in Silicon Valley, people actually want to talk to their banker and be accessed. And so why not create a community commercial bank that is connected deeply with our stakeholders? That is something that is about future generations. It is about legacy, Annika. It's about not only creating a bank so that we can exit and make a lot of money. It's really about building an institution for generations to come, for my children, our children. Again, for me personally, it means a lot because we owned a bank back in Uganda, and that got taken away during the expulsion of refugees. So for me personally, this means a lot to come back and be part of a great team and family to build this bank. But we talk about, Kanan, as you know, because you've been there, this being a family enterprise. Even though it's not a single family, this Altos Bank is very much about creating a community institution that's going to serve the community. Yes, harnessing the latest technology, but really focused on service and giving back. And of course, in the United States, we have the Community Reinvestment Act, so we have that. But from the very get-go, we've talked about what's our purpose, and we have an ESG committee that I chair. So we have tried to build in all of what we've been preaching into practice into this community institution. And we hope that it will be a model of other community institutions, whether banks or otherwise, as we reinvent again our institutions going forward, including open banking, using ledgers and all sorts of other things, not just crypto, not just stablecoin, but, open banking really connects us as households and families and individuals. So, it's our kind of way of trying to get back to the local, and really integrate at the local level.
Yeah, I know Anika has a question, but I'm going to jump in real quick just as a follow-up onto this and saying, when we were growing up, right, climate was a very different thing, right? There were no category 4 or 5, or at least we had never heard of those. Over the years, we've seen an escalation in climate. When we were growing up, floods were considered a third world problem,
Yes.
right? Has this new climate at least brought to the forefront that natural disasters, that the escalation in climate is a connection, and that do you think the messaging is correct? Are we building the right message?
So this is a great question, and I'll bring it in. We have a couple of great little stories, snippets from the bank and developing the bank and launching the bank, which is going to launch in the next month or so. We have a great board. About half of us are bankers. I'm not a banker. So, and I remember, all of us, it's a very regulated industry. You have to go and do your interviews with the regulators and tell them your life story and everything anything that you've ever done. And, one of the regulators in my interview said, what we're excited about is all your work on climate and sustainability, and that it will be inbuilt into this new bank, which I thought was remarkable because, I have to be honest, I don't have a lot of great excitement about regulators. And so I didn't, but this wonderful regulator was very, very clear that one of the values that I added to the board and the bank was my background and integrating that. Now, take that to the second point, which is that as a board, though, as I talked about, we have to pay attention to climate and sustainability in a more systematic, rigorous way, not the least of which because of risk management, as you were talking about floods and extreme weather events and so forth, and the Bay Area, earthquake, all sorts of things. It really, because it wasn't forefront. It's about raising the money. It's about, putting all those systems in place. You're a banker, but it hit us very recently. And you talked about category 4. Well, we had the Florida, hurricanes, right? And recently, right? And one of our places that investors could send their money to invest in the bank was in Florida. And we were up against a deadline. And people were trying to send money. And guess what? That institution was closed. And it was closed because they were in the midst of a weather-related event, right? And that meant that our deadlines were going to be pushed off, and that was going to have a material financial impact on the bank, potentially even being able to launch the bank. So it hit home very clearly and directly in a way that no one, even I, would have expected. That you picked a bank to help, a financial institution to help you gather investments from your investors to launch a community bank that's going to do these things. But hey, that bank couldn't function because it was in the midst of one of the worst, events in recent Florida history, right? So it really, it just reminded everyone, and now it reminded us as board members and as a team, that it could come from a very different place than you're thinking. It's not just, this, because we are connected. And the amazing thing was, as you know, Anand, and many people might not know, we still, despite all the digital, here in the United States even, we're sending paper checks across the country. Right? Like, who would have thought in the 21st century that if you want to use your IRA, your retirement account, and invest in something, in this case a bank, that you have to call up your agency, your retirement agency, accounting agency, and they're going to send a physical check to Florida. And guess what? The mail wasn't working because there was a bit of a hurricane. So it's a perfect question, and we experienced it, and it brought to home that this 3-part. I want to go back to the beginning: adaptation and resilience, absolutely carbon and methane reduction, and GHG reduction, decarbonization, but removal. I will say I didn't mention the 4th R, which Brad Ack and team mentioned yesterday, which is repair. And I don't want to say that repair isn't important. It is very important because we have gone to a point where whether it's Arctic ice or other types of things, we have to really be thinking about pretty audacious solutions for repair. So, but even with the bank is very much in a very day-to-day, very practical way. It is central to everything that we as human beings and our institutions have to do.
Yeah, one of the most notable comments yesterday from Kumi Naidu, of course, the advocate for both climate and social justice, was access does not equal influence. We have a lot of access. We're privileged. Um, we can access a lot of different people. How do you change access into influence?
I think, Kumi's a brother, as you know, Anna and Annika, we've been working together in various incarnations, for 25, 30 years. He's one of the great leaders and activist leaders of certainly my generation, our generation, and continues to be. The question is the question. I don't have a good answer, to be totally honest. I think that's the question that we're asking folks like Kumi, myself, and many others who have had access and some influence. But, the big question that I have in more of my reflective moments and even writing a book on is, how did we get here? Like I said, I have come full circle. I was at Stanford doing my doctorate at what was called the Center for International Security and Arms Control in the late 80s and early 90s, right? Because we were still in the, nuclear weapons were really the the big challenge of our time, Annika. So this is before your time. And in 1994, 30 years ago exactly, that institution changed to the Center for International Security and Cooperation. Same acronym, but went from end arms control to end cooperation. And I was talking to some of my faculty members there that are still around, incredible, legendary thinkers. And they were asking me why, what do I want to do now that I'm taking a little time, even though, as you can tell, I'm involved in lots of action-oriented things, to reflect a bit. And it really was saying, how did we get here? 30 years later, in the early 90s, mid 1990s, we are so full of optimism and hope. Take South Africa, where Kumi's from, where I've spent a lot of time. We had such belief at independence in South Africa in 1994 about the future. And, we're not going to give up. We believe in South Africa, but we're in a very dire situation there. Likewise, what we're talking about here in terms of climate and biodiversity. We didn't really think about it as much as we are now, but we started to really be, Rios and all sorts of things, and brought, we can go Kyoto's and Paris and so forth and so on. It's really quite remarkable that we are here today with the challenges that we have at the exponential pace that they're accelerating. And really it goes back to your question, your point, Annika, it's about the young people. And that's why I'm so, proud that we at Davos Worldwide, along with others, the next panel is going to have youth yesterday. It's really about, again, and that's why I think I go back to education, but education in a 21st century way, because we haven't solved it. And I talked about my children. They're like, well, what did you do? What were you doing all this time? Kind of thing. So we have a lot to be held accountable for. And the access influence, kind of dilemma that Kumi raised is one that we're all asking and don't have great answers.
Yeah, we've got when we talk about the young people, we see both sides of it, where there is a certain amount of disengagement from global affairs, from climate, especially in the Western world or in the global North. But then at the same time, we see hyper engagement on some segments of it. How do we get that balance where there is, they don't need to carry the weight of the world, but unfortunately, we are leaving the weight of the world to them. What are your thoughts?
Well, I make sure I understand your question. I mean, we don't want to put the weight of the world on the young people. That's for sure, because we have to continue to be their partners and supporters. What I'm trying to say, and I think what we all believe, I'm not saying anything new, is that they are the solution creators. They are the innovators and entrepreneurs of all kinds that will take us forward. And so the more we create the enabling environments and education, 21st century education is part of that, the more they can be successful. At the same time, I want to say that more generally, this kind of bifurcation where we have climate evangelists, and then all the rest, and certainly the deniers. And look, it's material reality. It's going to continue to accelerate and exacerbate the material effects. I gave that little example of the bank. It's going to hit every single institution, every single family, every single human being, sadly. And we hoped and still hope that we don't have to get to the extreme crises, but we're already seeing that, whether that's low island states, but really anywhere in the world. So I think, sadly, climate will become everybody's business when we really even more hit that fever pitch of, oh, this really matters to my day-to-day livelihood, to my financial fortunes, to my material reality. And I think that's maybe the the sanguine wisdom of old age. When we're younger, we think, oh, there is. There activists will always be there, like Kumi, like that are, and myself included, who were out there because we believed. But the vast majority of people are trying to live their lives. And I think about even my own parents. They're just trying to do the best they can, make ends meet, take care of their children, think about, day to day. It has to become so that they see that this is part of day-to-day living, is very much part of day-to-day survival, and hopefully more than survival, thriving.
My next question is about the day-to-day. I am not a banker, as you know. So for me, I would like to get the lens a little shifted. What does your bank that you're doing, how does that change the life for a normal middle-class family? I know Palo Alto is, not exactly the place for a normal middle-class family, but how do you involve them? How does it change the practical implications for consumers?
Yeah. So look, I want to say, first of all, I want to be, Palo Alto is a wonderful city, but our bank is headquartered in Los Altos. So we want to give love to our home place of Los Altos. That's okay. And that's why it's called Altos Bank, which means, of course, going up heights in Spanish. So there's a symbolic meaning. But regardless, Palo Alto, Los Altos still got, very wealthy, as you said, right? But this goes back to the question of equity. Huge inequalities in Silicon Valley, massive inequalities, despite the average wealth being much higher, of course, massive inequalities. So we are deeply connected. I'll just give you an important piece of this. In the United States, and it's funny for me to talk so much about the United States because I've done most of my work outside the United States professionally. I've lived in the United States half my life, but most of my work has been outside. There's 4,577 banks. Of that, only 100 are minority designated. Only 100 in the 21st century. Okay. That means that, and what that means is 50 plus 1% of the equity, or 50 plus 1% of the board are individuals from minority backgrounds. Okay, so there's only 100 of those, Annika. Of those 100, only 2 are multiracial, multi-ethnic, okay? So 2 out of 4,577 in 2024. If that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what, here we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever. I mean, and that's also sullied now. So JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, whatever way you want to frame it, that is hardly what we are talking about in practice, in material reality, because banks are where money are. That's where money flows. That's how the economy, so 2. So we will be the third multiracial, multi-ethnic, minority designated bank in the United States. So going back to Anand's question about doing something very locally that's creating, practicing what we preach, being a model of the kind of institution and the kind of practices we want, that's what we're doing. And it's hard because, I'll give you an example where we failed. We started off with a very gender diverse board. Through the process of the regulatory approvals, for a whole host of reasons that had not to do with gender, but had gender effects, our women were cut off from being on the board, and now we have all men on our board, and none of us are happy about it. And we can kind of wave our hands and say, no, we tried, we didn't try hard enough, we didn't do well enough. So we have to do better on that. But I hope this frame about minority designated institutions and minority designated banks, even in Silicon Valley, it matters that there is a community bank, a community institution that is going to be multiracial, minority owned. That's real. That's real practical material reality. It's not just talking about it, it's doing it. And we have to, hands raised, do better in terms of the gender diversity, because we can't be a great institution without it.
I absolutely love that you took accountability for that, even though you really tried. Obviously, I've known you for a few years, and I absolutely believe you that, you put your hand in the fire for this. My last question for today is about the 2030 agenda. You think it's too late to realize it?
I'd be very hard to get there. I launched this thing called with wonderful other people. So I want to say everything that I've done has been with incredible partners, teams, and so forth. We launched the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data in 2015. It was about harnessing the data revolution to achieve the SDGs. The former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, we saw him just recently at Stanford, was our champion and our vanguard around this. And it was basically saying we needed to have dynamic real-time data that was accessible and equitable to empower individual citizens, entrepreneurs, decision makers, not just monitoring data, but we needed the monitoring data as well. And, it was the largest SDG 17 partnership launch in 2015. And we were very proud of what we did between 2014 and 2017, 18, after which it continued on under great new leadership. But if you look at the data, Annika, it doesn't look good at all. So I'm a big believer that we have to look reality in the face, and we have to say the 2030 agenda should become the 2035 agenda. And we have to, we had a pandemic. Let's face it, it wasn't like we planned on a pandemic. And that, had many positive benefits, but when it came to the 2030 agenda, it certainly set us back. There are many other things that set us back, but that certainly was a big part of it. So I don't think, though, we should just do the 2035 agenda with the same. I think we should raise the ambition, and we should be thinking about a 2035 agenda and at the same time, a 2050 agenda. We already have a 2050 agenda on climate. We know where we want to be, more or less net zero, my view, net negative. So push out the SDGs to 2035, but add a 2050 agenda that's even more ambitious, and really then marshal all of our capacities, resources, assets, so forth and so on, and go for it. Really go for it.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left. I wanted to bring up something that I learned from a 12-year-old yesterday, as one should. And she said, I'm not an activist, but I enjoy climate activity. I like going to the beach to clean up with my friends. So what's your message to everybody? We don't all have to be activists, right? I mean, what is your message to everyone about what is happening in the world today, whether it's related to peace, whether it's related to climate, whether it's related to biodiversity, whether it's one unifying message?
I want to go back to what I said. It's about climate positive, sustainable development. And I know that's a kind of phraseology, but what it means is that we have to have sustainable prosperity and peace, sustainable and equitable prosperity and peace. And that means global north and south. That means the divides, even in Silicon Valley, as we were talking about, Annika. That's what it means. We can't, and it goes to your question, Anna, we can't have climate over here and poverty over here. We can't have, or equity over here. So if everyone is thinking about, like this wonderful young 12-year-old said to you, I like climate activity. When I go to the beach, I'm cleaning up. It's part of our day-to-day practice. It's part of our day-to-day practice. At the same time, we have to make big, big, big bets and big, big changes. So it's not just the micro. I mean, I love the micro, and I completely agree with that young person. But we have to create great new institutions designed for the future, while taking our existing institutions, as I was saying, forward into the 21st and 22nd century. So climate positive sustainable development is the way we bring this together, and make sure that we don't create more divides, but actually bring people together.
Looking at your background, your achievements, your rise to the positions of power that you have so rightfully gained, it's inspiration for anyone, that somebody that comes from a refugee camp um, could rise to these powerful positions of influence. Of what is the magic? What was the magic? What made this all happen? And I'm assuming no dogs and cats were eaten along the way.
No, I'm a big dog and cat lover, animal lover. I think, the interesting thing, reflection is very kind of you, and I know that I've been very blessed in terms of my professional career. But I think I have three reflections. Number one is, even with all of those ostensible successes and achievements, I still don't feel like I have accomplished very much. And so you wake up in the morning and you think, I think I've done all these things, or people say, but really, what am I doing now? And what impact has it really had? How did we get here if we were working so hard? So I have to be honest, there's still, maybe that's part of the lesson, which is you never really believe you've achieved. You always, I'll give you I'll be very quick. My mother, we had a little convenience store. I started a chain of grocery stores at Stanford when I was doing my doctorate to pay for my graduate degree. And in the evenings, some friends would come at the very end as we're closing the last one down in Palo Alto. And one of my great friends said to my mother, why do you work so hard? Your son's about to graduate from Stanford. Your daughter's a lawyer. You've succeeded. You came from all of this stuff. And she said, his name was Chuck, and he just passed away of cancer. God bless his soul. Chuck, people like this, we work. And when we're tired, we work some more. And I think that has been kind of instilled in me, Anand and Annika, since day one. So first of all, still don't feel like I've achieved even close to what I should achieve or give back. That's a better way of putting it in terms of legacy. Number two is I haven't been a very linear person. I didn't go up in one particular direction, in a private sector. I wasn't a banker. I wasn't a politician. I was, even education, I didn't go up to be, people would say, oh, you should be a president of a university. That's just not who I am, as you know, Anand and Annika. So I've done a very different path, shifting. And that's been wonderful because I've learned so much across a lot of range of different things. But it also has meant that, the kinds of conventional status positions have not been the ones that I have taken on. And I've done that very consciously. So young people have to make that decision. Do you want to stay in a particular sector or area and build yourself up and be at the very top? Totally an amazing way of living your life and professional career. Or do you want to try to weave your way through very different types of institutions, sectors, disciplines, like you said, and all those things? And there's a lot of benefits to that, but there's also costs because you never necessarily raise to those top things. For me, that's been magical because I feel like I'm always learning. And that would be the last thing, learning. And, so when I think about education now, I don't really think about education. I think about learning and lifelong learning. And that's what, every time learning about banking from you included, who would have thought at this point, but whatever it is, learning about something new, learning about the creative industries from my son, learning every day. I think that's what keeps us humble because we know We don't know. We don't know.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much, Dr. Khagram. I really appreciate it. Welcome to Davos Worldwide. We look forward to your leadership in initiative as well. And for all the contributions you have made and for all the contributions you are going to make. Annika?
I just want to say thank you. I really learned a lot from you just in this keynote, and thank you for being a part of Davos Worldwide.
That's an honor and a privilege. So thank you, Annika, Anand. And the best to everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you very much.